Hey there, and welcome to the video. I'm Dying Legacy, and this is the Grave Robber build, a Stamina Necromancer for solo content. This build requires no trial gear, mythic gear, or arena weapons. This is a base version of the Grave Dancer build that I had previously on the channel, that I will link in the description below for those who want to use trial gear, mythics, and arena weapons, as this build is mainly for people who are just starting out, or looking for a build that they can put together in just a few minutes. This is a quick build guide. We'll be going over the race, attributes, mundus, food and potions, followed by the gear, skills, passives and champion point slottables. The info will be minimal, so I'll only be going over what's necessary. However, do feel free to comment and let me know if you want a full detailed guide, or if there's anything I could do better. With that out of the way, let's get into the Grave Robber build. First off, beginning with the race, this is entirely up to yourself, as every race has its advantages and disadvantages, and every player should be entitled to play the way they want. But if you're looking for suggestions, I'd recommend either the Khajiit for extra critical damage, the Orc for extra weapon damage, a Nord if you're looking to be a bit more tanky, or you could choose the Red Guard if you're looking for a little more sustain. For the attributes, we are putting 64 points into Stamina. And for the Mundus Stone, when you plan on doing solo content, we are taking the Lover's Mundus Stone for that extra physical and spell penetration. And if you plan on doing group content, you can take the Thief Mundus Stone for that extra critical rating. For our food, we are taking the Artaeum Takeaway Broth, which will increase our max health, our health recovery, our max stamina, and stamina recovery. This is a gold quality food, so it's rather expensive if you're buying it from the guild merchant, or if you plan on buying the materials to make it yourself. In which case you can take the Dubious Cameronian Throne instead, as it's much cheaper and the materials are easier to get. You will however lose out in the health recovery and you'll have a slight decrease in the overall stats, but overall it's just minimal, so use whatever's easiest for you. For our potions, we are using the Essence of Weapon Power potions. You can either make these yourself at an alchemy station, or you can buy them from the guild merchant. Essence of Weapon Power is going to give us major brutality, major savagery, major endurance, and it's also going to restore some stamina for us. We'll be using these potions against those harder to kill bosses when we need some extra sustain and extra damage. However, if you can't get your hands on them, you can always use the Essence of Stamina potions that drop from the mobs around Tamriel. These are going to grant us major endurance as well as restore some stamina. They may not grant us much, but they are far easier to get, and we can use whatever advantage we can get our hands on. With that done, we'll move on to the gear, starting with our monster sets. All of these sets are going to be in medium with a maximum stamina enchant and a Divine's trait, and we have 3 choices. But first off, all headpieces can be gotten from their respective veteran difficulty dungeons, and the shoulders can all be gotten from the Undaunted vendors that you can find around any of the main cities. Our first choice is the Ice Heart set, which can be gotten from Direfrost Keep. This is going to add critical chance, and when we deal critical damage, you have a 20% chance to gain a damage shield that absorbs 5000 damage for 6 seconds. While the damage shield holds, you'll deal frost damage to all enemies within 5 meters of us every 1 second. This effect can occur once every 6 seconds, and the damage scales up the higher of your weapon or spell damage. Our next set choice is the Bloodspawn set, which can be gotten from Spindle Clutch 1. This set is going to add stamina recovery, and when we take damage, we have a 6% chance to generate ultimate and increase our physical and spell resistance. And our last set choice is the Stormfist set, which can be gotten from Tempest Island. This set's going to add stamina recovery, and when we deal damage, we have a 10% chance to create a Thunderfist to crush the enemy, dealing shock damage every 1 second for 3 seconds to all enemies within a 4 meter radius. And a final huge amount of physical damage when the fist closes. This effect can occur once every 8 seconds and scales up the higher of our weapon or spell damage. The Stormfist set is there if you plan on doing some extra damage altogether. Bloodspawn and Iceheart are our survivability sets. Next up, we'll go over our 5-piece sets. Just make sure you're wearing the exact same set for the front bar weapon as you are the back bar weapon, as we want all our 5-piece sets to be active at the same time. For our front bar weapon, we are going to be using a 2-handed mace with an absorb stamina enchant and the precise trait. For our back bar, we're going to be using a bow with a weapon damage enchant and the infuse trait. For all body pieces, we're going to be wearing them in medium with a maximum stamina enchant and a Divine's trait. And for our jewellery, we're going to be using weapon damage enchants and the Bloodthirsty trait. For the first set we're going to go over, this is the main set of the build. And this set is going to give us all of our survivability. And the set in question is the Hexus Ward set. You can get this from the Overland content in the Deadlands region, Or you can buy this from a guild merchant. Hexus Ward is going to add critical chance, and it's also going to add weapon and spell damage to the build. And for the 5-piece, dealing direct critical damage will grant us a damage shield that absorbs a huge amount of damage for 6 seconds. This effect can occur once every 2 seconds. As I said, this is the main set of the build, as this is going to give us most of our survivability. Next up, we have 2 options. You can choose whichever set fits you best or whichever is easiest to get. The first set is going to be from Overland content, and the second set is going to be from Dungeon content. So, starting with the Overland content, we have the Briarheart set, which can be found in Hrothgar. You can find this by killing any of the world bosses, by doing public dungeons, or doing the delves. You can even find these from the random chests scattered around the region. Or, to make things easier, you can buy this from a guild merchant. Briarheart is going to add some extra critical chance and maximum stamina, and when we deal critical damage, we'll increase our weapon and spell damage by 450 for 10 seconds. While this effect is active, our critical strikes are going to heal us. This effect can occur once every 15 seconds, and the heal scales off the higher of our max magicka or stamina. Next up, for our dungeon set, we're using the Pillar of Nirn set. This set can be found in Falkreath Hold, on either veteran or normal difficulty. The Pillar of Nirn set itself is going to grant us extra stamina, critical chance, and weapon and spell damage. And when we deal damage, we'll create a fissure underneath the enemy, and after 1 second, it'll deal bleed damage to all enemies within 2.5 meters and causing them to bleed for an additional amount of bleed damage over 10 seconds. This effect can occur once every 10 seconds and scales off the higher of our weapon or spell damage. The Pillar of Nirn set itself is going to give us a lot of extra damage on the build, while Briarheart gives us some extra damage while adding a little extra survivability. And that covers the gear. And with that out of the way, we're going to be moving on to the skills, starting with our front bar. First up is Stampede. You can morph this from Critical Charge. This is found in the 2-handed skill line. You'll launch across the earth and smash an enemy, dealing physical damage to them, all nearby enemies. This attack is always a critical strike, and after reaching your target, you sunder the ground beneath you, dealing physical damage to all enemies in the area every 1 second for 15 seconds. Next up is Carve. You can morph this from Cleave. This is also found in the 2-handed skill line. You'll focus your strength into a mighty swing, dealing bleed damage to enemies in front of you and causing them to bleed for an additional amount of bleed damage over 12 seconds. Hitting a target that is already bleeding from this ability extends the duration by 10 seconds up to a maximum of 30. You also gain a damage shield that absorbs damage for 6 seconds. We're also using Skeletal Archer. You can morph this from Skeletal Mage. This is found in the Gravelord skill line. You'll unearth a Skeletal Archer from the dirt to fight by your side for 16 seconds. The Archer attacks the closest enemy every 2 seconds, dealing physical damage. Each time the Archer deals damage, its next attack will do 5% more damage than the previous attacks. This will also create a corpse on death. Next up, we're using Blighted Blastbones. You can morph this from Blastbones. This is also found in the Gravelord skill line. You'll summon a decaying skeleton from the ground, and after 2.5 seconds, the skeleton runs after the target and explodes when it gets close to them, dealing disease damage to all enemies nearby and applying Major Defile to them for 4 seconds, reducing their healing received and health recovery by 16%. This will also create a corpse on death. Next up is Detonating Siphon. You can morph this from Shocking Siphon. This is also found in the Gravelord skill line. You'll violently drain the last spark of life from a corpse, dealing disease damage over 12 seconds to all enemies around the corpse and between you and the corpse. When the siphon ends, it causes the corpse to explode, dealing an additional amount of disease damage to all enemies around the corpse, and while slotted, your damage done is increased by 3%. Next up is the ultimate for the front bar. We're using Flawless Dawnbreaker. You can morph this from Dawnbreaker. This is found in the Fighters Guild skill line. You'll arm yourself with Meridia's Sacred Sword and dispense her Retribution, dealing physical damage to enemies in front of you, and an additional amount of physical damage over 6 seconds. After activating, your weapon and spell damage is increased by 300 for 20 seconds. This ultimate is mainly here for the passives from the Fighter Guild skill line. However, if a boss or an enemy is almost dead, you can proc this just to do some extra damage, or to just increase your weapon and spell damage. Next up is the back bar, starting with Endless Hail. You can morph this from Volley. You can find this in the bow skill line. You'll launch a multitude of arrows into the sky to rain down, dealing physical damage to enemies in the target area every 1 second for 12 seconds, after a 2-second delay. Next up, we're using Razor Caltrops. You can morph this from Caltrops. This is found in the Assault skill line. You'll hurl a ball of Caltrops that scatter over the target area, dealing physical damage every 1 second to enemies inside and reducing their movement speed by 50%. Enemies who take damage from the caltrops have Major Breach applied to them, reducing their physical and spell resistance by 5,948 for 4 seconds. Next up is Spirit Guardian. You can morph this from Spirit Mender, and you can find this in the Living Death skill line. You'll conjure a ghostly spirit to do your bidding and stray by your side for 16 seconds. The spirit heals you or the lowest health ally, if you happen to be in a group, around you every 2 seconds, restoring 3,752 health. While active, 10% of the damage you take is transferred to the spirit instead. This will create a corpse on death. Next, we're using Beckoning Armor. You can morph this from Bone Armor, and this is found in the Bone Tyrant skill line. Wrap yourself in hardened bone, granting you major resolve, increasing your physical resistance and spell resistance. While active, enemies that strike you with ranged attacks will be pulled towards you once every 2 seconds. Next, we're using Echoing Vigor. You can morph this from Vigor. This is found in the Assault skill line. You'll let loose a battle cry, instilling you and your allies with resolve and healing for 11,430 health over 10 seconds. Next up is the ultimate on the back bar, and we're using Pestilent Colossus. You can morph this from Frozen Colossus, and this is found in the Gravelord skill line. Unleash a Pestilent Flesh Colossus to pulverize enemies in the area. The Colossus smashes the ground 3 times over 3 seconds, dealing damage that increases with each hit, and disease damage with the first, second, and third smash. Dealing damage applies major vulnerability to any enemy hit for 12 seconds, increasing their damage taken by 10%. This is the main ultimate on the build. You want to use this whenever you have the appropriate amount of ultimate, which is 225 ultimate, to help keep major vulnerability on the enemy as long as possible. And that covers all the skills. And with the skills out of the way, we're going to move straight on to the passives, and we'll be starting with the class passives. First up is the Gravelord skill line. In here, you're going to find reusable parts, Detonel, Dismember, and Rapid Rot. You want to grab everything in here so you can decrease the cost of our summons, increase our critical chance against enemies under 25% health, to increase our spell and physical penetration, and to increase our damage done with damage over time effects. Next up is the Bone Tyrant skill line. In here you'll find Death Cleaning, Disdain Harm, Health Avarice, and Last Gasp. You want to grab everything in this skill line to help increase our sustain, reduce the damage we take from damage over time abilities, to increase our healing received, and to increase our max health. And next is the Living Death skill line. In here you'll find Curative Curse, Near Death Experience, Corpse Consumption, and Undead Confederate. You want to grab everything in here so that when you have a negative effect on you, your healing is increased by 8%. And while you have a Living Death ability slotted, your critical strike chance with all healing abilities is increased. As well as when you use an ability on a corpse, you'll generate extra ultimate. And while we have a summon active, our health, magicka, and stamina recovery is increased. Next, moving on to the weapon passives, we're using a two-handed weapon, so we'll be taking everything in the two-handed weapon skill line, starting with Forceful, Heavy Weapons, Balanced Blade, Follow-Up, and Battle Rush. This is going to increase our damage with the weapon, as well as decrease the cost of our abilities, and add an extra effect here or there. Next up is the bow skill line. In here you'll find Long Shots, Accuracy, Ranger, Hawkeye, and Hasty Retreat. You want to grab everything in this skill line to increase our damage as well as decrease the cost, as well as activate a few extra bonuses here or there. We'll also be grabbing everything in the medium armor skill line, as we're only wearing medium armor. In here you'll find Dexterity, Windwalker, Improved Sneak, Agility, and Athletics. Everything in here is going to increase our damage, our sustain, as well as increase our movement speed and reduce the cost of our roll dodges. Onto the guild passives next, starting with the Fighters Guild. In here you'll find Intimidating Presence, Slayer, Banish the Wicked, Skill Tracker, and Bounty Hunter. You don't have to grab everything in here. You mainly want Slayer, Banish the Wicked, and Skill Tracker. However, you can grab Intimidating Presence if you plan on doing story content, as this is going to allow you to intimidate NPCs and conversations to speed up your quest lines. And if you want, you can grab Bounty Hunter, but this is only active in Cyrodiil. This will allow you to accept bounty quests from the Fighters Guild there. Next up is the Undaunted passives. In here you'll find Undaunted Command and Undaunted Metal. With Undaunted Command, activating a synergy will restore 4% of our max health, stamina, and magicka. And Undaunted is going to increase our max health, stamina, and magicka by 2% per type of armor we're wearing. We're only wearing medium armor, so we're only going to get 2%, but it is a 2% increase to all of our max stats, so it is a necessary skill to grab. Next up is an Ease of Life skill. You'll find this in the Assault skill line, and it's Continuous Attack. You can put 2 points into this passive. However, you only need to put in 1, as when you put in 1 point, you'll gain Major Gallop at all times, increasing our mount speed. And if you put a second point in, it's not going to increase the speed of that at all. However, if you do plan on doing some kind of PvP in Cyrodiil or the Imperial City, you can put in a second point just to increase your weapon and spell damage and your magic and stamina recovery for 10 minutes after you grab a lumber mill, farm mine or keep. However, if you don't plan on doing Cyrodiil or PvP, just put in 1 point. Next up is our racial passives. No matter what race you've chosen, make sure you grab everything in here and make sure you read over them, as these are specifically for the race you've chosen. These can give things like increasing our damage, increasing our sustain, or increasing our mat stats. So no matter what, grab everything. And last but not least is another ESO of life skill, and it's medicinal use. You'll find this in the alchemy skill line. Medicinal use is for when using potions, the resulting effect lasts 30% longer. This just ensures that our potions last a lot longer than it takes for the cooldown to finish. This way you can always have a potion active at all times. And that covers all the passives on the build. Next up, we'll be jumping straight into the champion points, starting with the warfare tree. In here, you want to grab Fighting Finesse to increase our critical damage and critical healing. We want to grab Deadly Aim to increase our damage done with single target attacks. We want Thaumaturge to increase our damage done with damage over time effects. And we also want to grab Mastered Arms to increase our damage done with direct damage attacks. Next up into the fitness skill line. In here we want to grab Boundless Vitality to increase our max health, Fortified to give us extra armor, and Rejuvenation to increase our max sustain. We're also going to be grabbing Bloody Renewal. This is going to restore 1500 stamina whenever you kill an enemy. And onto the craft skill line. It doesn't really matter what you grab in here, as everything is situational and you can choose whatever you want for whatever you want to use it for. However, for myself, when I want to do soloing, I always tend to grab Treasure Hunter to increase the quality of items from treasure chests, Rationeer to increase the duration of my food, Liquid Efficiency just so there's a slight chance I'm not going to use a potion when I actually use it, and I also like to grab Steed's Blessing to increase my out of combat movement speed by 20%. And that covers the Grave Robber build. I really do hope you found it useful, and if you happen to be looking for a way to upgrade this build with either trial gear, mythic items or arena weapons, do check out my Gravedancer build. I will have it linked in the description below for you to make it easier to find. And if you happen to be looking for more builds like this, please do like and subscribe, as it does help me out immensely. And I appreciate anyone and everyone who does. And thank you to those who already have. You're absolutely incredible and I really appreciate it. And also, if you've any thoughts or recommendations, or if you're just looking to have a chat with me in general, do feel free to comment below. I try my absolute best to comment and reply to everybody, and I do love talking to you all individually. And I also want to let you know that I have a Twitch channel. I do a lot of my theory crafting on my Twitch channel, as I do happen to play a lot of ESO while I stream. And I also do variety content, where I do tend to just mess about and create chaos. So if that happens to be a thing, you can find me over at twitch.tv/Dying Legacy. And with that shameless self-plug out of the way, I've been Dying Legacy. This has been the Grave Robber build. Thank you so much for watching. I hope to catch you next time. Please take care of yourself, guys. And as always, please be awesome.